God of love and compassion, be with us this morning. May we see you in the world around us and in each and every person whom we encounter. Amen. Our passage this morning from the Gospel of Luke is known as what's called a call narrative. It is the story of Jesus inviting Peter to follow him, to become his disciple. Now, Peter wasn't a pastor or a highly educated theologian. Peter had no special qualifications or skills. He was just an average guy living his day-to-day life. He was a fisherman, and he fished along with his brother Andrew and their partners James and John. And in our story today, Simon Peter had just been fishing for hours and hours. He had caught nothing. He had already docked his boat, and he was just finishing cleaning the last of his nets before setting off and calling it a day when Jesus shows up. And with Jesus, a crowd was gathering around to hear him teach. The crowd became so large that it was pushing Jesus up against the shoreline along the Lake of Galilee. And before Peter knew it, he looked over his shoulder and saw that Jesus hopped into the boat that he just finished docking and let himself out into the sea to get a little bit of space from the crowd. And whether because he didn't have a choice, because he had to wait for his boat to be retrieved, Peter decided to stick around to hear Jesus teach. And just when Jesus seemed to be wrapping up his message, he turned to Peter. He singled him out there in front of everyone, and he invited him to do the very thing that he had been doing for hours. He invited Peter to go out into the deep waters and to cast down his net. Peter had made it to the end of his workday. He was ready to go home. This would be like me making it to 5 o'clock, turning off my computer, put on my coat, maybe even we make it to the car, turn on the engine, and somebody knocks on the window, says, "Hey, you mind coming back in, going back into the office, turning back on the computer?" Peter looks at Jesus and says, "Man, I literally have just been fishing in those exact waters for hours, and I've caught nothing." All right, why not? And as we all know, as the story goes, Peter hops into his boat, rows himself out into the deep water, and casts down his freshly cleaned net. An interesting note here, that when Jesus tells Peter to cast out his net into the deep water, he uses a Greek word here, bathos, a word primarily used throughout the Bible in connection with the primordial sea, a powerful Jewish image of chaos. In the first chapter of Genesis, after God had created the heavens and the earth, all that existed was darkness and the deep sea. The earth was formless and empty, surrounded entirely by the deep waters of chaos. And this word bathos would have been immediately recognized by the community gathered in our story today. And they would have heard Jesus' invitation here as an invitation out into the very symbol of chaos and the call to cast down their nets into that primordial, chaotic sea. Now let me pause here for just a moment to give us a little bit of background to help set the scene. Our story this morning happened a little bit over 2,000 years ago in the ancient Near East in the region known as Galilee. Here we find a Jewish community struggling under the oppression of Roman rule. They were suffering from overtaxation, from the abuse of power, from unfair and heavy policing, and they felt the fabric of their culture slipping away. It'd be safe to say that they felt their daily lives to be in chaos. They were hurting, and they together longed for a Messiah, for an anointed leader to come and rescue them. Now, the Jewish image of the time for a Messiah was that of a great king. Often the Messiah was thought to be one who would come and display great militaristic strength, who would fight and to lead their people out of oppression and into peace. The longed-for Messiah was to lead the people out of Roman rule and to reestablish their independence and their way of life. They wanted a way out of their present moment. They wanted for someone to come and for them to restore the order and peace. So here, amidst this Jewish oppression under Roman rule and the yearning for someone to come and lead them to victory, do we find the Gospel of Luke's account of Jesus inviting Peter, a lowly fisherman, to cast his net into chaos. Instead of recruiting a skilled swordsman and amassing an army, preparing them for battle, Jesus instead turns to an ordinary guy living an ordinary life and invites him to join him in his messianic work. If Peter lived in Maine today, we could imagine him maybe as a lobsterman. Maybe even he lived in Lewiston, Auburn. Maybe we'd bump into him at Hannaford. Most definitely at the Italian bakery. And maybe he'd even be sitting here among us today. And the invitation that Jesus offers to Peter is not a way out of or away from, but an invitation right back into the chaos of life. The invitation of Jesus here is not an escape to a future reality of victorious order and peace, but a call to see the messiness of the present moment and to remain there. And there, amidst the bathos, we're invited to fish. We're invited to work, to spend our time and our energy there in the deep waters of chaos. Here again, Jesus counters the messianic hopes of the day by, instead of fighting the fight for us, instead of going ahead, leading into victory, and letting us know once the battle is won so we can come out of hiding, he invites us to cast our own nets. He doesn't fish for Peter. He doesn't even row his boat out for him into the deep waters. But he is there with him, giving him the eyes to see the messiness of life, to see the hurting, the broken, the grieving and the lost, the oppressed and the weary. And there, he invites us to cast wide our embrace, to do the work of justice, to share in one another's journey. Professor Robert Dykstra is a professor of pastoral care at Princeton Seminary. And in most of his classes, he shares with them a story of what he refers to as one of his most profound moments of pastoral care. It was in the middle of a semester when Dykstra learned that one of his colleagues and dearest friends had lost her spouse to cancer. Dykstra repeatedly asked her if there was anything that he could do, if she would like to talk, to process her grief, if there was anything that he could bring her to the house. The faculty member thanked him kindly, but refused. Dykstra then offered to just come and sit with her in her office hours in the afternoon while she worked. And the grieving faculty member accepted. Similar to the way that Job's friend sat with him in the silence of the nights during his agony and anguish, Dykstra sat with his friend on the floor of her office in complete silence. Sometimes grading papers, sometimes sipping on tea, sometimes sharing in tears, and sometimes simply sitting. Every afternoon for nearly 2 weeks, until his colleague told him that she didn't need him to be with her anymore and that she was okay to be alone. During those afternoons, he never offered her advice. He never even exchanged verbal words of comfort, but he simply sat there in the billowing, comforting, and intimate silence. Months later, his colleague reached out to him, wanted to catch up. They were chatting, seeing how life was going, and she turned to him and said, "I want you to know that through all of my grief, through all of my conversations with friends, my shared tears and casseroles, the thing that stood out to me most, the thing that brought me the most healing, were those afternoons where you sat with me in silence and companionship." I think this is a beautiful story, and it is particularly powerful for our message today. We see here that Dykstra saw the chaos around him. He saw the pain and grief in a colleague and dear friend. He rowed out his boat, and there he offered to pull her up out of the chaos, to fix her pain. But there's nothing to fix about grief. So he cast down his net, and he stayed there in the chaos. He came alongside her, and in the depths of her pain, he was with her. It would be easy for us to feel the weight of the chaos around us and simply long for a way out. It would be easy for us to long for a leader to come and fix for us the problems around us and to restore for us a sense of order, of peace. But our invitation today is an invitation to follow Jesus back into our present realities, back into the heart of our communities, and to spend our time and our energy there. And this call is not a call to simply come and try to fix something or to offer some magical words of healing, but it is a call to come alongside one another and to share in one another's burdens, to cast wide our nets of embrace and to care for one another along life's journey, to work with one another towards justice, hope, towards peace, to bring comfort to those who mourn, to say no to the abuse of power, to tear down barriers that divide us against them, and to shine a light into the depths of chaos, magnifying the love that enfolds every single one of us. And this invitation of Jesus in our story today is a holy invitation. It is a sacred beckoning into a new way of life. It is an invitation into something, not an invitation to something. We aren't invited to fish, but to become fishers. Not to follow, but to become followers. And the difference between being invited to something versus into something is significant. It is like an invitation to babysit versus an invitation into parenthood. Babysitters are paid. Oftentimes, hopefully, there's some sort of screening to make sure they're qualified to watch the child. At the end of the day, they go home at the end time. If they do a good job, maybe you invite them back. If not, probably going to find a new babysitter. Parenthood, on the other hand, is an invitation into something, into a new way of life entirely. It isn't paid, and there aren't qualifications. And there aren't any moments when you are not a parent. No breaks or end times or times when you collect your check and leave. At 3 a.m., when the baby is screaming, you're still a parent. When the baby blows through their diaper and is desperately in need of a change, still a parent. Or as happened a couple weeks ago during church when Levi spit up all over Brittany. Still a parent. Parenthood is a permanent relationship, and it is full of messiness and joy. It is full of difficulty and wonder, and it is full of pain and wholeness. And it is an example of being invited and of lowering our nets into a new way of being. And this holy invitation of Jesus this morning, this invitation into a new way of life, beckons to each one of us. It may come to us at different times, in different ways, but it is there for all, regardless of our skills, education, our confidence levels, our feelings of preparedness or worthiness. It comes to each and every one of us, and we are invited into the messianic work of Jesus. We're invited to dive into the chaos, into the depths of our workplaces, our communities, our families, into the heart of our politics, our divisions, our messy systems, and there to cast down our nets. To work for wholeness and holiness, not division and isolation. And to find there in the depths of chaos a new way of living. To live into the messianic work of Jesus, where the hungry are fed, the grieving comforted, the sick made whole, and the oppressed find liberation and peace. And this is an invitation to care for one another. And friends, let us remember that in the story of Genesis, out of chaos comes life. Out of the deep sea, Peter's boat is filled to the brim of fish. And out of the depths of our present realities will come new life. So let us live into that new life. Let us go out into the chaos, into the depths of our daily lives. Let us cast wide our nets of embrace, and there let us find hope and peace. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by our guest, Carson Dockum, of the Office of Accessible Education at Bates College and a member of High Street Congregational Church. Filling in this week for Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to our church sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video versions of our sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you, now and always. See you next week.